Swiss watchmakers mocked Chinese watches for 50 years until they checked their actual sales numbers. Most people's understanding of overseas manufacturing sits 2 decades in the past, but the industry went from copying to competing to leading within a single generation. This represents a documented industrial shift spanning 7 distinct levels of progression. We will examine exactly how this transformation occurred. We need to set the record straight before analyzing the tiers and explain how an entire industry missed this progression. Subscribe to this channel right now to start noticing how many large shifts happen right under your nose. The signs were always there, but people simply refused to look. Mainstream media ignored the manufacturing data, and enthusiasts were too busy protecting their luxury investments to acknowledge the rising tide. If you want the actual truth behind these industries, hit that subscribe button as we dismantle every assumption you carry about global manufacturing. We will start at the very bottom, where the original Stereotype was born. Level 1 embodies the Stereotype, and we need to be ruthlessly honest about why that reputation exists. If you open a major e-commerce site and search for a $20 mechanical watch, you know precisely what arrives. You receive cheap alloys and derivative shapes with stamped hands that look cut with safety scissors. The mechanism inside might survive a decade, or it might violently self-destruct on a random Tuesday. That represents the reality at the very bottom. But dismissing this tier constitutes the exact mistake the establishment made. They saw the rough plating and laughed, while entirely missing what that rough plating funded. The mockery backfired in a spectacular fashion. These $20 throwaways served a distinct purpose by selling in the tens of millions. That volume pumped billions of dollars directly back into mainland factories, which meant directors stopped buying cheap tools. They purchased heavy industrial machinery instead, including 5-axis CNC mills and high-end stamping presses. This created identical infrastructure to what the old guard utilizes, using those cheap watches to build a substantial war chest. This tier represents strictly where overseas manufacturing started, but that revenue built the foundation for everything that followed. Once an assembly plant owns advanced machines, upgrading the blueprints becomes trivial. That forced a tectonic shift in daily operations as a solid floor materialized and the ceiling started moving upward. Level 2 brings the competent copy, where the aesthetic language heavily mimics prior designs. Assembly plants blatantly lifted from industry giants, but you must examine the execution closely. Somewhere around 2010, ownership decided standard output simply failed the market test, so they initiated serious reverse engineering protocols. Brands like Pagani Design and Steel Dive hit the scene, and suddenly, the raw materials changed. The cloudy mineral glass vanished to be replaced by scratch-resistant sapphire crystals, while cheap aluminum inserts swapped out for baked ceramic. The hollow bracelets became solid stainless steel, forming craft discipline right in front of you. These operations jumped from junk to precision quickly by treating the imitation phase as an aggressive training ground. They built muscle memory rather than just making fakes, making the copies competent and eventually highly competitive. They stopped cutting corners, and inside these steel cases you started seeing reliable workhorses instead of mystery metal mechanisms. Factories utilized NH35s and PT5000s, which are high-beat calibers that keep spectacular time. They were still tracing someone else's homework, but their handwriting became highly precise. As tolerances shrank and brushing became cleaner, the result materialized as a piece that felt like $500 but only cost $80. The old guard assumed this represented the permanent ceiling, believing these overseas factories would just build better copies forever. That assumption became a fatal error, because once a manufacturer masters the physical construction of a luxury timepiece, the only thing left to invent is an identity. The hardware was ready, and finding their own voice caused the entire market dynamic to fracture. Level 3 marks the turning point, and the precise moment a manufacturer stops looking over its shoulder. Imitation builds muscle memory, but originality builds legacy. At this tier, brands stopped tracing vintage divers and started designing for themselves, introducing the phase where the price tag stops dictating the prestige. You no longer buy a cheaper version of a Western blueprint, but rather purchase a distinctly original creation. This psychological shift occurs when a manufacturer starts branding their own unique geometry because they actually respect their own product. That self-respect triggered a design renaissance that mainstream enthusiasts flat out ignored, assuming the creativity represented a temporary fluke. It served instead as a permanent declaration of independence, where the training wheels came off and the designs started speaking for themselves. Analyze FIDA closely, as their Spacemaster did not trace the Omega Speedmaster but instead went its own way. Actual taikonauts strapped it to their wrists during real spacewalks outside the Shenzhou spacecraft. Examining the heritage reissues from the Tianjin watchmakers reveals designs with zero Western parallels. They feature distinct dial geometry, sharp typography, and unique case shapes that boldly state their origin rather than hiding it. The aesthetic stands strictly on its own as imitation vanished and creation took over. The broader enthusiast community kept their eyes squeezed shut, setting the stage for an embarrassing miscalculation in horological history. Collectors dismissed these original designs as anomalies and outright refused to connect the dots, staring directly at the future while calling it a passing novelty. Level 4 addresses an uncomfortable reality regarding the recent past. The collector community, journalists, and the European establishment spent decades dismissing this category. Pundits laughed at the knockoffs, and critics mocked the finishing techniques, treating an enormous industrial output like a giant punchline. While the West chuckled, overseas engineers worked quietly and relentlessly. Factory directors tore down Swiss pieces to their base components, while technicians mapped out the finishing under microscopes to meticulously document microscopic tolerances. One group wasted time, while the other did the homework, leading to a predictable conclusion. When you spend an era underestimating an opponent who methodically dissects your best work, you walk directly into a trap that is now snapped shut. Level 4 provides the physical evidence that the studying worked, specifically through Atelier Wen and their perception model. The dial isn't stamped in a hydraulic press, but rather features genuinely hand-turned guilloche, crafted by a master artisan named Cheng Yukai. He built his own rose engine just to cut these dials, creating a texture that catches the light with an intensity rivaling brands charging triple the price. The execution commands deep enthusiast respect globally, as the new guard caught up quietly. You cannot fake this level of artisanship because you either possess the skill or you do not, and they clearly have it. The West claimed this level of hand craftsmanship belonged exclusively to a few snowy valleys in Europe, but Cheng Yukai proved that geographic monopoly is a myth. The guilloche dial grabs the attention, but the engine runs the show as Atelier Wen powers the perception with an ultra-thin customized automatic caliber built by the Dandong factory. Known as the SL1588, it features precise finishing on the bridges, purple rhodium plating, and circular Geneva stripes. Dandong manufactures serious, ultra-thin mechanical architectures that rival European movements, costing 5 times the price. Machined gaps are virtually non-existent, and accuracy remains highly consistent. This specific movement proves that the industry is directly challenging European mechanics rather than just matching aesthetics. A firm foundation has been established where years of engineering debt are fully paid off. Every precise tick of that Dandong caliber dismantles another outdated stereotype, proving factory engineers can build the heart of the watch just as beautifully as the face. We are entering the complication tier, which is the territory where European brands make their highest margins and historically gatekept the entire industry. If you are enjoying this teardown and it is changing your perspective, take a single second to hit like so the algorithm shows this reality to more people. Algorithms respond to engagement, and this story deserves the spotlight. We will now examine the actual math behind the most gate-kept mechanism in horology. The numbers you are about to hear might sound fabricated, but they are completely real. Level 5 addresses the value shock by moving past philosophy and executing brutal math. In Switzerland, the tourbillon serves as the main gate-kept complication. Originally engineered to counter gravity on pocket watches, it functions today as pure mechanical flexing. The European establishment treats it like a velvet rope, where you cannot cross the barrier without draining your savings to cover a steep entry fee. Standard models run $30,000 to $50,000 due to engineered scarcity and a deliberate financial wall. They convinced the world that this spinning cage required such impossible complexity that only a soaring price tag could justify the existence of the mechanism, creating a highly profitable illusion. The Suggest Tourbillon Master shatters this illusion entirely. This mechanism features a genuine hand-wound ST8000 tourbillon movement that spins endlessly at 6 o'clock, backed by crisp finishing and a steady beat rate. The retail cost for this beautifully rotating carriage sits at $600, while the overseas equivalent costs around $15,000. The raw data already speaks volumes about this discrepancy, showing you pay a comical premium for a zip code. The exclusivity argument collapsed the precise moment this piece hit the open market, proving that math does not care about heritage. When an affordable alternative executes the identical mechanical performance as a luxury icon, the markup loses its mystique entirely. Level 6 changes the rules by setting the benchmark for what happens when a manufacturer stops competing on price and starts competing strictly on craft. For years, San Martin reigned as the undisputed king of high-quality homages. Building their war chest mirrored the Tier 1 factories, but their capital deployment followed a completely different strategy. Instead of just buying better machines, the ownership transformed their core philosophy into a permanent pivot away from standard industry practices. Chasing borrowed aesthetics ended, and the focus shifted to pure execution. That decision created a brand that stopped asking for permission and started dictating the standard for construction. Once you perfect the manufacturing tolerances, you hold all the leverage and no longer need to copy anyone when you can simply outbuild them. Tracing the case lines of the San Martin SN0144DG reveals razor-sharp execution and a truly original design language. The transitions between the brushed steel and the polished chamfers reflect light flawlessly, while the bracelet articulation feels fluid and devoid of the cheap rattle that plagued older generations. These finishes actively shame entry-level luxury brands, and the clasp mechanism snaps shut with authority. They operate at a level of physical construction that completely defies the price tag, but the case finishing acts only as the introduction. The exterior catches your eye, but the dial complications demand your undivided respect. When you hold this piece, the sheer density of the steel and the precision of the machining make it feel like a $2,000 watch, even though it costs a fraction of that amount. Focus tightly on the dial of that SN0144DG, where a functional power reserve indicator sits driven by a reliable base caliber. This gauge tracks precisely how much energy remains in the mainspring. Grand Seiko charges upwards of $5,000 to include a power reserve indicator on their dials, while aggressively marketing the feature as premium horology. San Martin executes that identical complication beautifully for about $350. You cannot justify a $5,000 price tag when the same capability costs a fraction of the price down the street. If you still assume this brand just manufactures copies, your information expired years ago. Engineers isolated a premium feature, perfected a reliable version of it, and served it up for far less, dismantling the pricing structure of mid-tier luxury. The mid-tier served only as the warm-up before the top tier introduces the real competition. Level 7 introduces the technical marvel nobody expected, shattering the stereotype completely and reframing global horology. For 50 years, the narrative insisted that mainland factories could only assemble basic gears, while claiming high horology required European air and century-old pedigrees. That narrative is entirely dead today. While the industry patted itself on the back, a team of engineers in Beijing quietly designed something that most heritage brands cannot even conceptualize or manufacture. The old establishment thought they were running a monopoly, but they did not realize they were running a race until they got lapped. This moment culminates a half-century of quiet progression, proving that every cheap $20 watch sold decades ago funded the research that made this final tier possible. Examine the Beijing watch factory. Tai Chi II, which is encased in 18-karat rose gold and features an enamel lunar phase. The exterior is not the main focus, as the real story beats inside with the TB04 caliber. This houses a true, functional dual-axis 3D tourbillon where the escapement rotates on a 60-second axis that intersects with a secondary 24-hour rotation. It tumbles through three-dimensional space, requiring micro-engineering that borders on the impossible. Only a tiny fraction of watchmakers on planet Earth possess the mathematical capability to make this function. It operates as a mechanical ballet of microscopic gears fighting gravity in 3 dimensions simultaneously. You cannot reverse engineer or copy this design, as you must understand the fundamental physics of timekeeping to build it. They did not trace the homework, but rather wrote a new textbook. Predictably, the Western establishment demands a high fee for this capability. When a heritage brand conceptualizes a double-axis tourbillon, they slap a price tag on it ranging from $200,000 to $500,000. The Beijing watch factory, Tai Chi II, costs roughly $66,000. If your immediate reaction involves shock that an overseas watch could demand that much, you miss the fundamental point and ask the wrong question. The reality changed, and your brain remains stuck in level 1. That asking price represents a mere fraction of what the old guard charges for this specific physics problem, proving that geographic monopolies died. The shock should not target the mainland cost, as the outrage truly belongs to the markup. Ultimately, we should ask why the Western alternative demands such a steep multiple for the corresponding mechanical capability rather than questioning the Beijing price tag. This transcends being merely impressive for a developing market and represents an undeniable horological triumph. The TB04 caliber proves that the engineering gap evaporated entirely. Mastering the machines served as step 1, nailing the craft came next, and conquering the difficult engineering served as the final achievement. The long game finished by proving the student did not just catch up to the master, but rather built a superior machine that emerged directly from the workshop to challenge the old hierarchy. The industry will never look the same again because dismissive laughter has permanently morphed into nervous silence. Engineering a 3-dimensional tourbillon that rivals the greatest minds in Geneva proves they own a permanent seat at the table. The old guard spent decades treating overseas manufacturing like a joke until reality finally knocked on the door. The industry found that the technical gap evaporated, and in some categories, it vanished entirely. Chinese watchmaking is no longer a rising threat, but an arrived reality. You can respect the engineering or you can ignore it, but you can no longer pretend it is not happening. The long period of imitation finished exactly where the data predicted it would. If this breakdown changed how you view the industry, hit like and subscribe, as there are dozens of other markets experiencing this exact same shift that we will examine next.